Okay, let's start with just a little bit on just setting the space and where we are. This is a video. It might be a little bit choppy for some of you, but just sort of getting a drone um, spread out on our farm, who we are, our history. We have 2.5 acres of intensive veg on an 8-acre property. We're blessed to be in Sonoma County, so about an hour and a half north of the Golden Gate Bridge of San Francisco. We are in this beautiful Atascadero Valley bottom. You can see it sort of spreading out to the left, which is to the south. And this used to be just a wetland area where the water just sort of moved throughout the valley. And then 120 years ago or something like that, the Army Corps of Engineers dug a channel and made it more suitable for agriculture, for better or for worse. Going back further in history, this was hunting grounds, and actually a lot of maps show this as both hosting the coastal Miwok from the south as well as the Kashaya Pomo from the north, or the right side of this picture here. Very much appreciate their stewardship of the land. Of course, they're still very much here, and I encourage you to look at some of the cool projects that people are doing, like the Great Rancheria, as well as the Cultural Conservancy and Heron Shadow Farm, which is in the same Atascadero Valley shed, and some of the cool crops and seed saving that they're doing for Indigenous communities. Um, okay, so we have been on this property in next month, it'll be 19 years. Prior to us, it was a farm, but it was a tillage-based farm. Um, Going on to some of our stats by the numbers, we are fully no-till on that 2.5 acres of field space. We have a revenue of 180 per acre, and that's including all of our acreage. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. We have 6 to 10 full-time equivalent employees that are year-round. There are 6 people who are working today. They're planting some lettuce and they're doing some pre-harvest for Friday farmers market, as well as a couple of restaurants today, which is what's happening out in the field away from me. About half of our food goes to our CSA. We run a weekly CSA from April through November, and then every other week over the winter. We love our CSA. About 40% goes to 3 year-round farmers markets. Right now we're doing Sonoma Valley, Santa Rosa, and Sebastopol. And then in the summertime, we'll do Occidental instead of Sonoma. And about 10% of our food goes to a bunch of dedicated restaurants, plus our local food hub, Feed Sonoma. So except for that Feed Sonoma, 99% of our food stays within 15 miles of the farm, which is super important to us. Um, Okay, a little bit of different history. So Paul and myself started singing Frog's Farm 18 years ago, but we had a different background. This is Paul in the right photo, and then myself in the bottom photo, and one of our counterparts, Momadou, up above. And I put this in there just so that you can sort of really get a visual of we had a different background coming into this. And so we weren't stuck into the box of farming. I'm working with a women's cooperative there. He is working on agroforestry. And then between the two of us, we did 5 years there. Paul's third year, he started an agroforestry demonstration farm that I helped him on. That was 2001 when we left that, and we still sort of check in on it when we have friends go back and above. It still has a lot of the trees there and so forth. But that is sort of the background we came. Also, definitely working with the indigenous knowledge there. Okay, very different continent, different peoples. I understand that. But one of the things that we've really found is how important that working with the land, working with Mother Nature truly is, more than a lot of the modern technology and so forth. Okay, now dropping into Singing Frogs Farm, we moved here, like I said, just about 19 years ago. Here's what it looked like 18 years ago. We got our tractor down in the fields. This is a February picture, February 9th, I believe. The fields were tilled, cover crops are in, there's very little biodiversity, there really aren't any hedgerows. This is what we started with. This is a year in when we're making our tillage beds. You can see that soil is very sandy. It was not so productive. We had a lot of pests and weeds and so forth. And this is later in the year where, again, you're still not seeing a lot of those hedgerows. You see a little bit at the very top, one of our first hedgerows up there, but not all that productive. And we were really sort of working it out. It took us about 3 years until we got to the no-till, and you can see the difference, the vibrancy, the perennials, the annuals, the intercropping, a lot of that here. So, and here's an overview shot. This is actually a couple years old, this shot, but you can see all the different crops going on and all the different practices. You can see the hedgerows in this picture and the vibrancy of that. Okay, I am going to get a little bit into our practices, but if you are on that newer side, since it seems like the group is pretty split, I'm going to run through things pretty quickly. So head over to our website if you really want to hear more. Under the resources tabs, there's actually all sorts of videos of presentations of ours and things like that. So I will get into it a little bit, but not too much. Okay, so this talk was, 16 years. Like, how's it going? And what have we learned? Um, this is my most slidey slide with a lot of words on it. I didn't know how else to do it. And we'll then go into some of these things. First off, none of what we're doing is new. Regenerative growing, people have been doing it for a very long time. It's not a white farmer innovation. We may have made it sound like that was the case for a while, but even we had a background that was very different. Um, we're stuck in this quote unquote broken food system. And I put those quotes around it very much. It's built, on the capitalist and colonial framework. And it's not broken for some people. It's not broken for, the fast food companies, the ag corporations, and so forth. We all know that. But maybe it's broken on our side, and we're starting to feel that come to a height. And one of the ways that I'm noticing that, CAF actually held a policy meeting in our county. I don't know, maybe it was 2 months ago, where they got together a bunch of the farmers and they're like, okay, what are your policy interests? Where should we be focusing our energy? They do that in a lot of parts of the state. And it was all of us. We were all saying the cost of labor going up, the cost of some of our basic costs from compost to packaging, and so forth going up. And yet the stagnant income that we can bring in from our food is just, it's really challenging. And a very simple descriptor I can give of that is, when we started out, our starting rate of pay was $9 an hour. And these days it's $20 an hour. And I feel crappy about that. I feel like it should be higher. We do work people up. They get their first raise at 3 months, and then 6 months, and then a year, and so forth and so on. But that's a more than doubling, right? And that's what needed to happen. And yet, on the other side, take like a bunch of chard, for instance. Back in the early days, we were selling a bunch of chard for $2.50. Now it's $4. I can't really push it higher because that's just where it is. I would like to charge $6, but that has actually, from when we started talking about, hey, you can do this and it's profitable and all that, that has gotten harder. And that, I think, is that where that brokenness is. And even early on, it was really challenging, and people were like, wow, at Singing Frogs Farm, you're amazing. You're bringing in 100,000 per acre, which is what it was at that time. But it's got to be a different way. And so I'm watching this like, where are we going? Because it's cracking and it's breaking more and more. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but lessons learned and where are we? Like, that is a huge underpinning to where we are right now. So such that I am looking for more and more ways of other ways to bring income into our farm to support it and make it grow, because we want to continue growing food. Are we able to go on that line of black and not going too much into the red? Yes, we are. It's quite the struggle. So I just really felt the need to bring that up. I'll also say there, because I brought in those numbers of 100,000 per acre, now 180,000 per acre. The reason that we brought those numbers up was because when we first started, we were still hearing remnants of the 1970s get big or get out. And so when we showed up at a table and we're like, yeah, we're a farm. And they were like, oh, great. How big is your 100 acre, 500 acres? We're like, no, we're 3 acres. And they were like, yeah, you're a gardener. Get out of here. And so we started to say, wait, we're actually feeding a lot of people, and this is how much we're bringing. That number was really useful for getting us at that table. And I don't mean us, the Kaisers, I mean us small farmers. And so I'm glad that people are continuing to talk about that. And our 180 isn't all that impressive. I mean, I know a farmer in North Carolina who's doing 300K per acre. So we're all learning and working through this. Okay, moving into more tangible things. Um, if you've heard our presentations, if you've been on a farm tour, you've heard us talk about the principles of soil management. And as I was thinking about this presentation, I was like, I don't know what else to say. And it's not because I feel like I'm stuck in a box, it's because it works. It's because when I have out here a new farmer who's starting up a no-till farm in the south of the city, or if I have a gardener coming out here asking me about their raised beds, or whatever the case may be. In 2017, we did a talk with Gabe Brown, where we went. Gabe Brown is a regenerative rancher from South Dakota who does 3,000 acres. We're going through the exact same principles. You will hear me show you our principles that have six of them right now. It doesn't. There's some deviation. Jesse Frost of No-Till Growers, he has four. Helen Athow, who has a new no-till book out, she has 10 of them. But they all sort of come together, and you can see the lines. And I like how they work in so many different contexts. Compost, I'm going to get into talking about compost. We have definitely learned some things. We were using too much early on. How much is too much? So I'll show you some pictures and go into that. Carbon sequestration, we have always been big on talking about that. And I will say, it has shifted a little bit from, hey, let's work on these small farms and get the carbon in the ground and sequester enough carbon that we can bring ourselves below 350 parts per million. Maybe it doesn't feel reasonable, but also on the other side, we are seeing that getting that carbon in the ground, increasing our soil carbon, our soil organic matter, then gives us climatic resilience when we're dealing with the climate chaos that is coming down the lane. Oh, I'm going to touch base on nutrient density. I'll do that when I'm there. And then I'm going to end up with people are key. People, people, people. We couldn't do this without people, and we have had shifts in management and the types of people and the roles on the farm. So this is just sort of a synopsis. Now let's get into it more. And we have actually redone our mission over the last couple of years. And I think it sort of encapsulates us. We're here to grow soil, right? Healthy soil that's carbon rich and full of microbiology, to grow food, nutrient dense food, food for the soul, which includes flowers, and to grow farmers, which honestly is why we're all here today discussing. Okay. Okay, so going back to some of my originally thoughts, this is a slide I've shown for many years. It's not super new. We need small farms. This is from some research from the ETC group. I've got the information down below. And the bottom line there, what it really purports is that 70% of the world's food is produced by 30% of the producers. And their smallholders are 2 hectares, which is about 4 acres or less. And you can also look at the other amazing stats, like 40% of smallholders are women versus 22% of industrial and so forth. These numbers were used on a big scale. Like we're talking at the UN and everything, and they scared people. And so guess what? There were a couple studies that, sort of came back, and you can guess, who they were funded by. But the funny thing is, there are two bigger studies that I found at institutions, and they still found that like 20% and 40% of the world's food was grown by smallholders, which I thought was pretty amazing. And especially given one of the studies completely omitted Africa and South America. So like basically the global South. But even still, it's definitely a point of conversation and a point of we need small farms. Like I feel this is so important. And also those small farms, if we're on our land with our family, we're going to be more ecologically based. We're more in touch with Mother Nature and so forth. This actually came across my Instagram last week. Look at the date of it, January 28th of this year. So this is out of a university in the Netherlands. Small farms contribute to 1/3 of the food consumed in high income nations. So that's not considering what they consume in their own nations. But so glad that this conversation is still ongoing. Okay. Um, Principles of soil health. I told you I would talk about them. Many of you have heard them before. Just real quick, how are they manifest in our system? So disturb the soil as little as possible, keep living roots in the ground as often as possible, grow as many different species of plants as you can, keep the soil covered as much as you can, incorporate animals and insects as much as you can, and knowing your context. Um, this is sort of the culmination. This is actually an old shot. Two of these people have now started their second farm in Australia. And this goes through how do we do the bread and butter of our farming, switching from one crop, here a broccoli that is finished and a Tokyo Bacana and switching it to the next crop. This is a stop motion of 45 minutes, taking every front thing to the compost pile from above ground. We're not disturbing the soil in any way. So using loppers and knives. Yes, adding some fertilizers. I'll talk about those in a minute. Adding a light layer of compost. We'll talk about that. It looks like a lot because it's very dark and especially on the fertilizers, but it's about a quarter to a half inch. Using large transplants, it's a lot of work. Hence the coffee break, right? Using large transplants. And then we're also interplanting in here. So we have a brassica with an interplant of a little gem going in between there, getting it settled, getting it watered in and done. So I wanted to show that. If you want to see it again, it's on the basic principles page of our website. You can just have it on loop and watch what they're doing, breaking it down a little bit more. So the carbon and biology from the prior crops is feeding and helping the next crops thrive. Through these practices, through also bringing in compost, we definitely have increased our soil organic matter. And because we were trialing and piddling around, it took us a few years to bring it up. And I'm hearing now newer farmers, depending on where they are, their soil type and their ecosystem and weather and so forth, I'm hearing anywhere from 1 to 3 percentage point increases per year that people are having. But we started with a soil organic matter of about 2.4%. These days, depending on where you go, and these days is the last 12 years, depending on where you are on the farm, how what season and so forth, it's anywhere from 8 to 14%. This is not the soil level. This is not where the compost is being applied. This is at a deeper level, 6 to 12 inches, because that's where we feel a lot of the roots are growing. Um, let's see. Those principles, so we're not disturbing the soil. I'm not going to go into why tillage is bad on the microbial side, the life side, as well as the chemical side. Look that up. Keeping living roots in the ground as often as possible, as many interplants as we can do. We're about ready right now to get started. We haven't started yet doing interplants because we worry about the amount of sunlight on the farm that the plants are able to get. So we can't do it in the middle of winter. We put in our first broccolis a couple of weeks ago, and we did another crop of cabbage and kohlrabi yesterday, or no, Monday. So definitely are getting some of those larger crops out for this season already. And give us another 2 weeks and we'll start doing this. So we've got Romanesco cauliflower here with an oak leaf lettuce interplant. It's 100% crop cover of it on the left. Same crop a couple months later, or maybe a month later on the right. We had a 60% crop of that Panisse oak leaf lettuce. We're harvesting that just as they closed canopy. So keeping living roots in the ground, but honestly also keeping the soil covered, keeping photosynthesis going, so much more in here. Here's another example with tomatoes. And an important part of that system of keeping living roots in the ground is our nursery. So our nursery is important. We do large transplants, and we do large transplants so that we can go from a large photosynthesizing plant to the next one, like you saw in that video, relatively quickly. So we're not using 128s or 210s or anything like that. We're using 6 packs for almost everything. And that gives a lot of diversity. This is sort of a picture that's got a lot of cacophonousness because many flower crops in the front, but there you can also see carrots and him weeding out a crop and then some brassicas in the background. And that diversity can be a little crazy making in the management side of things. Again, it's just wonderful to have lots of people, but it also gives us so much resilience. Every year we have several complete crop failures or partial crop failures. But by having so many different parts of that, so many different crops, the weather systems, be they normal or be they abnormal, will affect them differently. So, like for us this winter, we actually had quite a bit of a loss on our overwintered carrots, which we do in our hoop houses. That was a huge bummer because right now I usually love giving out carrots to our CSA. We only had one CSA worth this winter versus last winter we had five. However, our beets really rocked it and our winter squash really rocked it. So that diversity giving us that economic resilience. We do direct seed, but we try to, so you can see a couple carrot crops in this picture right here, but we try to minimize it as much as possible. Like beets, for instance, we transplant. Um, and just recognizing that the direct seeded crops, you're going to have more barren exposed soil, but it's also more labor for the extra layers of weeding and so forth. But yes, we need our carrots in the winter time. We have arugula crops, spinach crops, baby kale that we're harvesting from right now that are all direct seeded. In the spring, we'll do some herbs. We've already seeded a couple rounds of radishes and turnips. All of those are direct seeded crops. Um, how many square feet of nursery space do you need to service your fields? Who I don't know what to square. I would have to think about that, and you could email me and I could give you an answer, but I can't give it to you off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Um, okay. I think that was an Elizabeth Breathe picture. Oh, no, actually, what it was is looking at the different kinds of crops in the ground and all the diversity. Flowers, I mentioned earlier that flowers are 3% of our bed space over the course of the year, but about 12 to 15% of our revenue. A lot more labor going in there. I honestly have loved bringing flowers into the farm because of the diversity. Diversity of roots in the ground. Honestly, our vegetable crops, how many aster family, how many brassicas, solanaceae, cucurbit, carrot family do we have? But when you get into flowers, you're multiplying that so many, many times. We have about 90 varieties of vegetables we grow and about 90 varieties of flowers that we grow. Um, Also, the structure, and you can even see that in this picture here. They sort of work like mini hedgerows some of the times. And midsummer, I will make sure to put some of our quick sunflower crops in the middle of a field so that it helps with climactic stabilization. And we definitely see that. And then midsummer, if I need to put it, we need to put in like, say, a lettuce crop. We might put that in right next to a hedgerow, so it's got more protection there. But we might also put it right next to a zinnia or a dahlia row because we know that that will offer a little climactic stabilization. Um, Okay, those principles, as many different plants as possible, and keeping the soil covered, ideally with green photosynthesizing plants. When that's not possible, an organic mulch like a straw mulch, wood chips and pathways, and then also plastic mulches are another things. We'll use that for occultating. You can see there's a row right at about 6 o'clock right now, and two more then that have landscape fabric over them, occultating them. But we also, you can see there's some cipollini onions in the top of that picture there, and they have plastic mulch on the pathways. We love it with green photosynthesizing plants. Also, the roadways here, we manage our roadways as much as possible so that we have perennial grasses and clovers that are in those roadways year round. So we don't have dust in the late summertime, but also we find that that is amazing habitat for some predators like spiders and so forth that will then go out hunting into the fields. Let's see, I was going to talk about, anyhow, let me know if there's questions there, keeping the soil covered. Another breathe slide. Life improves the capacity of the environment to sustain life. This is actually a Frank Herbert quote, but it is not because it's Frank Herbert, but just this idea of how can we increase life is what I go back to when we have problems. Like for instance, in our hoop houses, we've had some problems with too many detritivores, right? Because we have a lot of compost, and it's a beautiful environment for them. We'll have springtails and millipedes that will go after some of our crops if it's too wet. Okay, so what can we do? What sort of life can we bring in there that will, help make those plants more robust? Maybe we did need different mycorrhizae. What do we need for predators of those? We need more beetles. Maybe we can improve the hedgerow outside so we have more beetles that are, going in. Maybe we need to bring in a cover crop. Like, what can we do on the life side of things? Never what can we do on the killing side of things, the biocide, be it herbicide, pesticide, anything like that. But what action can we have? Incorporating animals and insects, that's sort of what I'm talking about. Oh, this slide is a little funky, but I think you can see it. Hedgerows. If you know us, you know that we love our hedgerows early on. And actually, I think I have a slide for that, so I'll wait. Hedgerows are so amazing for bringing in life and supporting Mother Nature so that she can support us is just so tremendously important. So if we can have space for our predatory insects, also our birds, also, lizards and snakes and so forth, they will help keep things in balance. So some examples here. Also, just a look back, this is 16 years ago where we were still doing some tillage in our middle fields. And this is when we got a grant from our local RCD, Goldridge, to put in 3,000 Sonoma County native pollinator friendly plants. And this really lighted those hedgerows up. So where you're looking now, I've actually turned 160 degrees, but this is the same hedgerow in the same space that you're looking at here a couple years later, a couple years later yet, a couple years later yet. Um, and so just having those throughout the farm has been tremendous for us. This is just to give you a sense of how many we actually have around the farm. And when we designed the farm, we looked at studies that showed that your beneficial insects would go 250 or 500 feet out in the farm. And we said, screw that, we wanted a lot tighter. So every annual crop on our farm is planted within 125 feet of a hedgerow. And that's super important to us. I talked about the climactic stabilization of flowers acting like hedgerows, but there's nothing like a hedgerow. This is a hot, hot day, and we harvested leeks and then moved into the shade to clean those leeks up. Okay, shifting a little bit to talk about cover crops. Cover crops are minor for us, but we find that we get a lot of people really interested in them. Still also feeding the soil in a very different way, keeping the ground covered, and so forth. Now, we don't do cover crops on much of our property, and I'll show you that um, actually in just a second. Um, and we do them maybe in a different way than other people. So what's in our cover crop blend? Our main cover crop blend, we have as many different species as I can get locally. We do 3 different kinds of oats. And in fact, a consultant who was out here several years ago, Ray Archuleta, he does a lot in no-till. He highly recommended for our bottomlands that can get really swampy for us to get black oats specifically. I can't get those in California, so I order them from the Midwest. But everything else I get locally. So there's rye, there's triticale, there's a couple of different mixes. I try to get as much as I can in there. You can see it's very grain based. You can also see there's some clover and there's some bell beans and there's some vetch and other things, but it's primarily grasses because we're just really in those trying to get carbon in the ground, feed all of that. Where we do our cover crops are our bottom lands. We cannot grow economic crops in these fields in the winter time, and we want to hold the soil in place. So I wanted to talk about termination because generally cover crops are done in organic farming and actually increased tillage because now you have another crop that you've got to incorporate. We don't worry about it getting all the way as tall as most people, as mature as most people will talk about. You can see in these pictures here, Leo is weed whacking them. That is how we will terminate it. One year we did a scythe because I had people who were really excited to do that, but mostly not. We have talked about getting a flail mower. If you have one, that's great, but we don't. And it's really honestly not. We rented one year, and the weed whacker takes us about the same amount of time. You can see this is about 18 inches tall that he is cutting. We want to get our next economic crops in there. And in that 18 inches, that cover crop has done a lot. So he's cutting it and then we are occultating it. You will notice we don't use silage tarps throughout the farm. That is always a discussion because so many other people do it, but we have found that landscape fabric does really well for us and it's a lot easier to manage. So in the bottom left picture, and these were all pictures that were taken last year in March. You see that same field that he is cutting in the upper ones now covered with silage, not, with occultation landscape fabric. And then you can see in the middle bottom picture, this was a cover crop that we had cut 3 weeks prior and covered. And it's not quite done per what I would like if I was desperate, I would use it, but you can still see there's a little bit of light anemic green in some of the plants under there. The one on the far right, that actually happened to be a summer cover crop we did, which is rare, but you can see it looks quite dry, and so happy to plant into that. In both of those bottom pictures, with the dried deceased cover crop, we're not going to remove that, nor the roots in the ground. We are going to leave that in place. We're going to prepare on top of it, just like you saw in that video, putting down organic fertilizers and compost, and then planting our transplants straight in there. So this is a place where I would not direct seed, but that's okay because most of our crops are transplant. Let's see. Let's see. So not straw in these pictures. What else do I want to say about cover crops on this level? I will mention the one on the right, I did say was a summer cover crop. We did that in an area that hadn't been farmed for a couple of years. We'd sort of stepped back things, and it hadn't been managed very well due to human issues on the farm. And so that area had a big winter cover crop last winter, 24 to 25. And then we did a couple of summer cover crops, and it's actually about to get planted right now because we just occultated it over the winter and it's ready to go. You don't need to hear the weed whacker. What I did want to talk about is where do we cover crop? The area that you see in this picture here is what floods on our farm. And you can sort of see looking down over the valley there. When we have major rains, we will flood down there. And so for food safety reasons, we cannot be farming in those areas. Above those lines, almost never get cover crops. I said almost because there's a couple beds that are exceptions, and trying some buckwheat in our hoop houses midsummer to give them a break. But overall, 99%, I will tell you that we have found that our soil organic matter, our soil microbiology, our soil health has increased through constant cropping. And that means primarily vegetable with some flower crops. And we had, I'm not going to share these slides because I haven't gotten permission, but I was working with UC Berkeley and their agroecology lab, and they were testing soil from 12 different places on our farm. And the carbon that nematodes was using was actually far higher in the areas that were constant cropped than those areas that were cropped and then cover cropped. Our beds on our farm, there's 312 of them, get anywhere from 3 to 9 crops per year. And I'm not counting when we do intercrops. The bottom fields that you see down there in orange, they will only get 3, and that includes a cover crop. They have longer crops. I like to say one of my favorite adages is a farmer's footstep is your best fertilizer. And this picture is sort of taken from above the barn. So you can see that that has the least farmer footsteps down there. Um, Great. Um, There is a question right now, a couple of questions. First, where do you get your straw from that we use as mulch? We like using rice straw. And for a while, I had a relationship with an organic rice farmer in Chico. And then he started doing no-till and keeping all of his straw, which is great. So I get organic rice straw from our feed store here. How do you get the amendments in contact with the soil? If you're keeping all the cover crop biomass on the ground, I really don't find that it's a problem. I will actually say that, so when we chop the cover crop, as you see in these pictures here, we will actually often put the calcium on it then because it helps it break down. And if we can actually get a tractor down there, which usually this time of year, like today, there is a no-go on driving the tractor because the roads are way too wet. But if it happens that we have a really dry patch, we'll actually prep the beds with all the fertilizers over the green cut cover crop and then put compost on it and then cover it because it will decompose even more quickly than that. But that's a rare situation. Once it's dry, I don't worry about it because you're putting down the fertilizer, then you're putting compost on top of it, then you're planting in it, and then you're watering it in. And so that really sort of mobilizes it and gets it to move around. Um, let's see. I'm also just I'm taking a look at questions. Longtime organic no-till farmer clay soil in Ventura County, Southern California. Amazing. Soil has improved. Unfortunately, so have the gopher invasion from the nearby fields. Ooh, gophers isn't something I put into this talk. Let's talk about that for a second. Do you have successes to report? You know what? I've actually talked to a lot of no-till farmers who voles are an issue for them. You are not destroying their dens when you are not tilling. And so I do not have a major success story. When I talk about gophers, what I talk about is first looking at the ecology. Do you have predators? Just like I was talking about insect predators before, like are you able to be linked to riparian corridors so that you have mammalian predators? Okay, that's not going to do much. Okay, do you have owl boxes and raptor perches? We have a couple raptor perches right smack in the middle of our fields. Okay, that's going to do something, but not a 10. And then you've got the pseudo um, ecology and the pseudo ecology on our farm is our barn cats. So we have them trained. We actually they aged out because we've been here for 17 years. And we got some new feral cats this year. And then we trap and we trap and we trap. And we always have two people who are trained to trap. And in the late spring, when they're really going crazy before they have, babies or just afterwards, we may spend 6 hours a week on trapping. And I'm sorry, that is not a solution. That's not a huge success, but we do stay on top of it. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I do see a question about direct seeded, but I'm going to talk about something that's brand new in the last 24 months on our farm. And this was doing a living mulch. I got excited and inspired to do this. And so in our bottom fields, we sowed last winter, so October, November 2024, 3 beds of clover. And you see those in the upper left picture. You can see a picture from 1/8/25 there. You see all the irrigation hoses are completely wonky. That's from a flood having moved them. So that soil was nice and held intact by the clover, and then the normal cover crop just to the right of that. We tried both transplanting in the leftmost bed and direct seeding, or just broadcasting rather, in the right 2 beds. It really didn't make a sense, so it didn't make a difference. Speaking a little too fast there. And we did have a few weeds pop through there. And then in the bottom picture, you can see Leo again. Leo isn't always our weed whacker, but he is in these pictures. He's actually weed whacking that. And you can see there's quite a bit of grass in there. We did end up doing a major weed of the non-clover species there, but also a lot of those were winter species that didn't end up being an issue. We weed whacked it. We did not occultate it. We did a direct prep on top of that weed whacked clover. So end of March last year, and we planted, now go up to the upper middle picture, two beds of red Russian kale, and then on the left is one bed of cauliflower. I will tell you that that red Russian kale, another part of that crop, and this is a pretty shoddy looking bed, but is in the upper right hand of this slide here. And it was 2 weeks later for us to start harvesting it. It's got more pest damage on it, and it was less delicious than the one that was grown in the clover. So the clover in situ is fixing nitrogen, covering the soil, and just keeping everything so much more happy. You can see that end of April picture. Also, we had just uncovered some cover crop to the right of that, and it looks like beets are planted into those beds there. So if you look at the side of that picture, you can see what that looks like. You can see the compost on top, and then the little pink beet leaves popping up there. Um, Midsummer, when those brassica crops were done, we chopped them out, we weed whacked the whole thing again, and we planted two beds of broccoli in the lower side and one bed of cauliflower on the upper side, and then also cauliflower in the next beds up. Um, they were much more healthy, robust, not necessarily earlier to harvest this time, but larger heads and some of our best cauliflower and broccoli that we have had on the farm. And then there's a picture from end of November. It looks sort of shoddy. You can actually see some of our winter squash still in. It was an insane year for the winter squash, and we didn't have frost to kill it. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. So it looks sort of messy, but we've just left it this winter for the cover crop to grow, and it now looks about like the 324 picture where Leo is weed whacking, and we're about to start the process over again. I'm really excited about this. I think it's great. And now the 11 beds to the left of it, where you see the winter cover crop, the winter squash plants, we tried something different. There was one problem that we had with this, and that was that the clover that we chose to sow in fall of 2024, we tried to find what we a low growing clover. Makes sense, right? You don't want it to compete for light with the plants. And we found that white Palestinian clover was what was recommended as a low growing clover. Also, I was talking to a farmer in the Northeast, and he had recommended that one. You can look in the middle upper picture how robust that is. You take that clover, you mix it in with the intercrop, and it loves that too. Plus, it's now got fertilizers and compost and irrigation. So that was the one thing that we had to deal with. We ended up weed whacking the pathway, which wasn't a big deal. And for each of the crops, we had to go through and sort of do at once through hand cut down of the clover between the plants. That was a little labor intensive. So we said, okay, let's see if we can get even a lower clover. And what we trialed in the beds, to the left of this winter was a micro clover. I have to say, not every experiment works out great. We had really poor germination. It had a hard time germinating in on top of the beds. It did great in the pathways. And so it is growing. I probably should have taken a picture for this, but we ended up then sowing over it about 3 weeks ago before a rain, white Palestinian clover, because we were just like, oh shoot, this is going to be a complete failure. At least we know the white Palestinian does work. But I was trying to get better. So not quite sure what to do with that, and just being completely open and transparent on that. But overall, I think it's a huge success. Obviously, I'm not going to grow lettuce in there. These are our bottom fields where we grow some bigger plants. We're thinking about trialing some corn in some of these beds this year, winter squash, and of course, more brassicas. So hoping you can glean something from this. Um, do. Great. Um, Okay, I'm going to transition to talking about compost And just sort of checking time, doing great. Compost, super important. This is a great shot of Miguel throwing compost. Yes, we do it manually. You can see there's some leftover Brassica stems in there. We're not really concerned about those. They're what we call a slow release pellets. And you can see Sam in the background also throwing compost. We use quite a lot of compost per year. And this is just a real estimate, hence the little squiggly lines. But we buy in about 80 yards of municipal compost from various different places. We do bring in 50 yards of aged horse manure that was given organic feed. We know our farmer and know what he's giving them, so we don't get any herbicides residual through their manure. But at least almost half of our compost is from on-farm materials. So what we're taking out of the fields, weeds, and so forth and so on. So people often ask us, and we're doing about 80 to 100 yards per acre of compost. Now, can you have too much of a good thing of compost and nutrient runoff? When we started, we were loading it on. We were doing an inch to an inch and a half of compost. We also had access to really good, cheap, high quality municipal compost. That composter is no longer in business, unfortunately. And that did definitely give us a jump start to the farm. And as we were working through our no-till, there were a couple things that came off. One of them is we had some pushback on nutrient runoff and having too high nutrients. First, the pushback came on nitrogen and then also on phosphorus. So one of the things that we did, and this you can see this is 10 years ago now, for 3 winters, we tested water runoff for nitrogen and also phosphorus. And you can see this is sort of how the water flows through our property and hits some of our ponds. This is what we found. Running onto our property was 4 parts per million and 7 parts per million. The 6 parts per million on the left, that's a pond we put in right below our main composting area with the express purpose of catching any runoff and slowing it down. Um, and then as we continue to test it down further into the stream, you can see there's one place on the property where water leaves the farm unless we have a flood. And it actually showed that we were cleaning the water of the nitrogen rather than the opposite. So that definitely felt important. The phosphorus was a way less interesting story. It was the same throughout the entire property. Um, let's see. I had some other thoughts on this. Let me just see if I can get them together. I do know that there are a lot of thoughts on um, no-till growing and phosphorus, especially if animal manure is being used. And what we found around the time that we were doing these tests is that we had some pushback for having pretty high phosphorus in our soil tests. We originally had someone say, oh, that's dangerous. And then we had another person, it was actually Ray Ward, who runs Ward Lab in Kearney, Nebraska, say, oh, wait a second. Actually, yes, that is high, but we're seeing in living soil, farms that have living soil and do no-till that have high biology, that yes, there is higher phosphorus and the biology is able to hold that. The biology is able to buffer it. What one would have with high, and so it's just, I want to bring it up because compost is a great thing and you can have too much of a great thing. All of this made us really say, let's back off on our compost application. So although we were starting at an inch, inch and a half, we really backed off to about a 1/4 inch. And we've maintained that since 2016. And still our system has really high soil organic matter, really high microbiology. Some people early on were saying, oh, you have high soil organic matter because you've imported it all through the compost. Even in those days when we were doing an inch to an inch and a half, our back of the envelope calculations were showing that it could only account for a quarter of our increase in soil organic matter. And now at this point, our soil organic matter had since then gone up a little bit. It's not, it's really from those principles of soil management, from having continuous photosynthesis in the ground, keeping it covered, keeping that biology happy, and so forth. I was looking at some of our soil tests from 2022, 2024, and our phosphorus has actually dipped back down a little bit, which is a great thing because we're continuing to crop, continuing to add phosphorus, and so forth. I think that's what I wanted to say on that. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions. Okay, how much? Soil carbon, still talking about soil organic matter. It's important to us. These pictures here are from a test we did actually with our nutrient density tests. And what this is, the soil on the right is ours, obviously, can't you tell? The soil on the left is from a neighbor in our valley bottom that has a perennial crop, i.e. wine grapes, with winter cover crop. And these samples were taken on the same day, both at 6 to 12 inch or 15 to 30 centimeter, however you prefer, depth. Let me tell you, the sample on the left was really hard to get because it was hard pack. And you can just see the difference in moisture, in life, in roots, in biology, all of that. And we did a slake test, great way to test your soil biology really quickly, where you put the samples in soil and see what happens with the water. And the one on the right, the one that was taken from a cauliflower bed, it just held together. Actually, we left it on the counter for over 24 hours. And the only thing is, it happened to get a little darker and sort of make a tea of the water. The one on the left just totally devolved into sand at the bottom. So the one on the right, the roots holding it together, the high soil biology, all of the super molecules that biology is pushing out to hold the bits of soil together, create that aggregation, create that soil ecology in there. Um, Tests from CAF, and this was actually from their climate smart farming portion of the organization, found that we have 60 tons of carbon per hectare in that top 6 inches. And we then tested this along with our neighbor along our north side, and that property really hasn't been managed much over the past, well, 19 years since we've been here. And they've got really beautiful, deep rooted perennial soil, perennial grasses in there. And you can see that ours had over 60 tons of carbon per hectare versus theirs had maybe about 25. And that was good, healthy soil. So definitely having that carbon in there. This was a more fun part of their study. They took another farm, and this was Hillview Farm. And what we did is we took a plot of theirs that was a year and a half old, that was 4 years old, and then our newest no-till plots that were at that time 7 years old, and then our oldest, which at that time were in the 10 to 13. And what they're really showing is that over time, our total carbon in our soil is getting better as we are intensively farming it. And so this is in the top 6 inches, the 6 to 12 inches, and then the 12 to 24 inches. And even in that bottom one, you're seeing a little bit of an increase in soil organic matter and soil carbon, rather. So definitely, as people are starting off no-till, we have heard just verbally from people that yes, it gets easier. We see our plants are more robust as we go on in the years, but also having that data to show that increase in soil carbon is amazing. Now, as I mentioned before, we also see the manifestation of that when we're not in the beautiful, low of 50, high of 75, but when we have frosts, when we have floods, when we have smoke from fires and so forth. And what we've personally witnessed, and the science also says it, is that our soil, which is carbon rich and biologically active, it doesn't necessarily thrive, especially when we have really intense smoke. The plants are challenged, just like the humans are challenged, but that diverse ecology and the soil structure are able to hold things together. Also, by running a no-till farm, another side note, we have to be flexible all the time. what crops didn't do well this winter? I told you about the carrots. Okay, how are we going to flex and move? We're going to take those out and plant something else in them right away. But also the people and the community and the connections that we have there, that helps us get through those times. Talking about floods, so that does happen in our valley bottom, but it is an extreme event. This is last February. So, to give you an idea of our floods within 24 hours, how that looks and how it looks afterwards, it looks a little bit muddy, but you can see the floodwaters come and the floodwaters go, and that soil structure is holding in place. And ideally, we have a cover crop holding it, with those roots in the ground. But even when we don't, the aggregation and those pockets, we talk about higher soil organic matter having better water holding capacity. It also has better air holding capacity. And so that soil structure is definitely a solution for us in those times. Smoke, when we had the Tubbs fire, when we had the fires of, 2020, 2019, we probably pushed ourselves a little too far in terms of farming. You can see these people harvesting spinach with respirators on in this picture. We've since decided to move that back and have protocols for what we're doing in the field when we have heat, when we have smoke, and so forth. But we've also learned that our plants, they shut down when they get a certain level of sulfuric oxide in the air. They actually shut their pores, just like us. It's poison. They don't want to let it in. And that can be really, really trying on our plants. The year that we had the smoke, we had a couple of beds that were transplanted by some people that were newer, and they had pockets of air around them. They hadn't really been pushed down. Those plants all withered versus the ones that had good soil contact and had really been watered in and had grown a little bit. They made it through it. They really wilted and looked horrible for several days afterwards, and then they were able to come out. Okay, point being, the high soil carbon and biology and all of the diverse um, perennials that we have around it. Those are what we lean to when we have the climate chaos, and is helping us move through that. Okay, this pretty picture of Nina and some big broccolis. I wanted to move into talking about nutrient density, which is also definitely a part of things. For years, we talked about how it made sense. You have more nutrients in your soil, you have more soil biology. It should make sense that we have healthier food. We all know that the food that we eat today is much less dense than that they say our grandparents ate or whatnot. So we were thrilled when we were contacted to be a part of a study by David Montgomery and Ann Bickley. Maybe some of you have read this book. I recommend it. It came out in 2022. And what they did is they really wanted to compare regenerative farms, not necessarily organic, but regenerative, and conventional farms, and what the nutrient density was. We ended up growing out cabbage that we had a neighbor farm. They were not conventional, they were organic, but they were tillage based. And what we found is that ours was much higher in vitamin K and E and B, but where those big macronutrients, but where it really, really, really shined was where you got into the phytonutrients, the polysterols, the phenolics, and so forth. So I have a page on our website dedicated to this, but also feel, run out and see the book. There's also a journal article that's linked in there. And to me, this is another part of the story. It would be ideal if, linking it back to the economic hardship at the beginning, we could say, oh, our food has more nutrient density, therefore we can charge more for it. That works a little bit, but not very much, because people see chard and they see chard and it doesn't look that different to them. You can talk about taste, and you can talk about how a tomato tastes in summer versus in winter. And people get that a little bit because those nutrients create flavor, right? Um, but I do feel that it is an important thing to talk about, and it is a part of the puzzle. And we're glad to have some data. We definitely need more coming down the pipeline on this. And then how are we doing for time? Ooh, Um, the people. These are all the people that are working on our farm right now. I had fun doing this over a few minutes. There's a lot of them, and they're really tremendous. And I would say that one of the things that we've learned, we've really moved from the innovators who started this farm and had all this energy to get out there and to talk about it and so forth, to having larger groups of people. And wow, we figured out the system, like, let's stick with it. Um, we also, on our family side, had some health issues. My husband has a chronic health issue that has really popped up again. And that has made us step back. And we have this wonderful farm. It was definitely something we wanted to dedicate ourselves to continuing that on. So, over the last 6 years or so, the people have been taught us so much because we've moved from, okay, we figured out the system and this is how we do it. Okay, now let's just replicate that. Well, that doesn't work. I mean, if somebody who's young and wants to learn and is working for you comes to you with, hey, I have this idea, and you say, nope, we tried that 10 years ago, it didn't work. It just kills things. And so, we're really focused on, like, let's continue to innovate. And you have an idea, let's trial that out. You want to grow a new crop? Well, that didn't work well 10 years ago, but oh, great. Guess what? It does work well in 2025. And it makes people really excited. Oh, you want to try, some summer cover crops. Okay, great. Let's try that out. Oh, that worked great in this way or that way. So we're still continuing to try things. And sometimes we're trying things anew and anew again. And just recognizing that part of what makes this farm shine is the farmers. And we are all learning, we are all constantly learning. And it's taken it from more of sort of a pyramid of the owners running it to a collaborative. Yes, we do still have myself. I'm the main, general farm manager, and we have a farm manager that really manages the fields, and he's amazing and so forth. And we have senior people, but we're all communicating and collaborating and having weekly meetings to talk over the highlights and everything. So it takes time. People are amazing. They bring so much to the farm, to the table, and could not do it without them. And just sort of to illustrate that, I don't know how this is what we looked like early on. And as we have grown, it has just become, more and more people. You can see Paul's not even in the 2022 picture, and the 2025 picture. A lot of those amazing farmers who are really collaborating with us. Okay, great. I'm going to end it on that and go to some more questions. Actually, I want to get out of this. So let me do this one last slide. Um, I don't love doing a sales pitch, but I'm going to do it. If you're around and in the area, we are doing some workshops. There's a QR code. There's a whole bunch of them. The Intensive Living Soils Workshop, which is on a Tuesday, is all day. It is more intended for serious people, for farmers. And it's on a weekday and it's a whole day. We dive into it. You get our book. We do several different things in the field. And then we started last year this Home Farmer series, where we have a spring, a summer, and an autumn. People who are on the smaller scale who like things sort of broken down better, they really enjoy that. They even go home with a flat of veggie starts, which they love. They tell me about and they tell me about and they tell me about, and I'm thrilled. Um, and anyhow, so if you have any interest, reach out and do that. And I'm going to stop the presentation and just focus then on questions for our last few minutes. Okay. Um, let's see. Oh, great. There's this Q&A session. I guess I wasn't seeing that. So let's go through a few of these. Okay, not all compost is made equally, but we don't have great compost here. So are what we are getting is mostly compost mulch, low nutrients, and we can use 2 to 4 inches of it, and have to add fertilizer. I just want to point out that compost quality is so different from each facility, unfortunately. Okay, so we did talk about how much of our compost comes from municipal versus manure versus our own, and that gets mixed. So an important concept for us is that we almost never want to use compost of one source on our beds. Because the stuff you get municipally, you said it's mostly mulch, and yes, ours is too. And so it's going to be low in biology, also because most composting facilities dry it out because it's easier for them to then truck it around. And so that biology is very low. But what we produce out of our fields and the manure is very high. So we will create a pile until it's about the size of a truck of our own biomass. And then we will start to turn it with our tractor. So that our tractor is our compost mobile. Takes compost out of the field, turns the compost, brings compost back in the field, and start incorporating the municipal compost and the manure at that time. If somebody's on a really, really small scale, I even recommend, getting, bagged manure or something like mix things in. We really believe that 1 + 1 + 1 equals 10, not three, when doing that. So that's one thing that I wanted to point out that we have found. I will also say that some of the municipal composting places, they have a basic compost that they sell, and then they're fancier ones. And if you ask them what's in the fancier ones, it's the basic ones plus fertilizers. So do your research on that because you may want to add your own fertilizers and know what you're putting into on your own beds for that. So I hope that's useful. I'm glad someone recognizes Nina. That was an old picture. Great presentation. Thank you. Da, da, da. Um, okay. Intense weeds like Bermuda grass is a question. Oh, and fertilizers. I will talk about that in a second, but Bermuda grass first. And we had a little bit come in on some straw early on. Um, the you got to be on it. It's one of those weeds. You got to know your weeds. You got to know which ones are the ones that you've got to spend all your time on, and the ones that, yeah, no big deal. Um, so Bermuda grass, occultate, solarize, be on it, tear it out and then be really thoughtful about that area. And I'm sorry, you probably know that and you're like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. We've tried that. It no-till doesn't have a specific solution except for that we're more intensive and we just try to have our intention there. Um, Bindweed, that is probably our biggest, that's my one that I hate the most. And I hate to say that in a no-till system, we head towards a more fungally dominant system, and they like those better. Elaine Ingram, bless her soul, she passed away recently. She used to say that we needed to find a way to eat them because it's just going to be there in a no, high biology system. So again, one of those that we've just got to be on and be aware of. What fertilizers do we use? And I'm sorry, I didn't talk about that earlier. So this was based on soil tests, what we chose. But we use our main one that we use is a nitrogen source. And the reason for that, linking it back with compost, is if you use enough compost to get your nitrogen needs, you are going to have way, way, way too much phosphorus. And so we use a chicken feather meal, an organic chicken feather meal, which depending on where you get it from is either a 1300 or a 1200. So it's got no phosphorus, right? Or very little that's undetectable. And so that helps balance it out. For a 60-foot bed, we're going to use 2 quarts. Our measuring device for those is a yogurt cup. So it's a quart. So we use 2 of those over a 60-foot bed. One might want to use more when getting going. We'll sort of, watch how things are going. So that's for nitrogen. We then use for calcium, we use a crushed oyster shell. We like that because, like the feather meal, it's a byproduct of another human process rather than a mined product. Um, and we'll use half as much as we use of the chicken feather meal. The third one that we use a rock dust, and currently we're using azomite. We've tried a couple of different ones. In fact, back in 2017 or 18, I said, gosh, we've used so much of this. We've probably, filled up the fields with it. Let's stop. We stopped for 2 years and started to see some micronutrient deficiencies. And so we started back up again and immediately got rid of those. So I do believe a little bit of rock dust is part of it. So those three. Um, you don't use any manure or animal products. What other suggestions do you have? Um, we didn't at a certain time. early on. We had a totally vegan compost. We were still using the chicken feather meal at that time, but we found that the bulk density of our soil was too light and things were falling over. So we did go to using manure. It's probably not what you want to hear. I'm sorry, you may need to chat with somebody else on that. Oh, please share how much azomite. I'm sorry, it's the same as the calcium. So over a 60-foot bed, it would be 2 quarts of the chicken feather meal and 1 quart each of the calcium and the azomite. Thank you, Deborah, for catching that. I'm also seeing a Q&A section over here. So I'm going to run through those right now. How important is intercropping in maximizing the production and acreage is your question. Ooh, we do as much as we possibly can. In the summer, I would say we are intercropping half of our beds. Um, so it's quite a lot. And the longer crop, you've got 100% crop cover in there. And then the shorter crop, you've got anywhere from 40 to 70% of your what your max crop cover could be, if that makes sense. I will say that Jesse Frost's book, The Living Soil Handbook, if you don't have this book, it's a, ooh, can you see it? I don't know how to do that. There we go. He actually has a great appendix that talks about intercropping and different things. And he has some different ideas than we do. We primarily do brassicas and lettuces. We grow a lot of those. You saw the tomatoes. We have done peppers, but that has to be really short lettuce. So we're really looking at like architecture and age of the plants when we're doing that. If we want something that's super fast, a little gem is what we will throw in there. And we grow, gosh, we seed. I did at least 600 little gems every week. So we're growing a lot of those, and often it's more than double that. Brandon says, can you explain your process for prepping a direct seeded bed? Thank you for asking that, especially if you're leaving root systems in the ground from the previous crops. Great. Leaving root systems in the ground, whether it's direct seeded or not, we find, first of all, if this is the soil level and you get your handy harvest knife. I'm not cutting the plant up here. I'm trying to not even cut it right there. What I'm trying to do is cut it like this. A, so you're below the soil surface, and B, and now this is the stem, cutting it at an angle, it's going to decompose more quickly than if you just cut it straight across because you've got more surface area now open. And then if you are cutting that prior crop below the soil surface and you're putting a little bit of compost on top of it, it's honestly not a problem even for direct seeded crops. Um, I was going to say if you were going from a direct seeded like a mustard to another one, that's a lot to take out. But honestly, we usually wouldn't do two direct seeded crops right behind each other. I hope that answers your question. We did transition to leaving all the plant roots in the ground. Okay, never say all. Sometimes some of our mustard crops, it's just easier to pull them out than cutting that many of them. But most of our crops, we are leaving those plants in the soil, the roots in the soil, and it really isn't a problem. Now, I was talking with a farmer up in Carbondale, Colorado, and she just cannot get the microbial biology up high enough to be able to decompose those. So she is fully no-till and she says she has to pull them out. So again, what is your context? Um, have you used land-raised seeds for diversity of genetics? Um, Not specifically trying to. That is an interest area of ours, and I actually am spending some time this year looking at our seed sourcing and where are those seeds coming from. Like most market gardeners, most of our seeds come from Johnny's because there's that economic pull, and I just need crops that I can go with quickly. We save seeds on very, very, very few varieties, mostly flowers and heirloom tomatoes, and that's about it. Um, that's an area we could all definitely get better in. How do we attract young farmers and train them? We have a large farm name, and so I am blessed. We have a lot of people coming to us. And yet, if we need people, actually the calf job board is the best place that we have found people. I would never put something on a general Craigslist or something like that. How do we train them? People get trained by being put through the daily work on the farm. Um, and we, after a month, will meet with people, and they're just learning bits every day. We have a biweekly staff meeting. We'll go over topics there. And then as people have been on the farm longer and longer, sometimes it's 1 month, sometimes it's 3 or 6 months, they'll start taking on leadership roles. And so somebody else on the farm will train them, maybe in managing the irrigation, maybe in doing the direct seeding in a topic like that. And then you have something that you is your baby and you're really able to manage. And we find that that's great. And then when people are ready, we have regular check-ins and people are telling us, okay, now we want to transition to something else. Then you teach that person what you're doing and you learn something new. So just moving people around. Okay, we're at time. There are some more questions, but
So many more questions, and we could probably spend days and weeks under your tutelage there, Elizabeth. So you have so much to share, so much wisdom and experience, and you've been so generous with your time. And I hope everybody at home was able to get as much as I did out of today's workshop. And of course, Singing Frogs does have those additional workshops and educational programs that they do that are fantastic. So I would encourage you to go check those out. And of course, continue talking amongst yourselves, sharing your own tips and resources, your trials and errors in the world of no-till. And Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time.
so glad that everybody made it here today. We have a good group. If anybody is in Sonoma County and will be at the in-person event on Thursday tomorrow, I'll be there. So hope to meet up with you.
All right, we'll see you guys at the next workshop here at the California Small Farm Conference.
Okay.